In 1943, General Hap Arnold offered Robert Morgan any job in the Army Air Forces, anything except his own. It was a reward. Morgan had just become a national icon, the first bomber pilot to complete 25 missions over Nazi Germany and make it home alive, all aboard his trusty Memphis Belle, the most famous B-17 of the war. Morgan could have taken a prestigious post, stateside, away from the horrors of war, but he couldn't get the fight out from beneath his skin. So Morgan looked the general in the eye, and not only volunteered to go back, but requested the merciless, vast theater of the Pacific. On one condition: he would fly the most sophisticated bomber the world had ever seen. In late 1943, Captain Robert K. Morgan was trapped in the purgatory of success. He had achieved national icon status as the pilot of the Memphis Belle, the first B-17 to complete 25 successful missions over Europe. He was celebrated in banquet halls and paraded through city streets, a smiling symbol of American resilience. But beneath the veneer of the smiling hero, the fast-driving, hard-living pilot felt a profound restlessness. The war was far from over, and for a man wired for the adrenaline of the cockpit, the safety of the publicity circuit was suffocating. His trajectory changed during a fateful tour of Boeing's Wichita plant. There, Morgan caught his first glimpse of the weapon that would define the second half of the war, the B-29 Superfortress. It was, in his words, quote, "love at first sight." The contrast between his battered utilitarian Belle and this new machine was staggering. The B-29 was a sleek, silver giant with a 141-foot wingspan that dwarfed his old flying fortress, but the true revolution lay inside. Where the B-17 required crews to wear bulky shearling suits and oxygen masks to survive the freezing, thin air of altitude, the B-29 was fully pressurized. It promised a war fought in shirt sleeves at 30,000 feet, cruising faster and higher than any enemy fighter could comfortably climb. The manual gunners were gone, replaced by a futuristic system of remote-controlled turrets operated by sights from the cabin. It was a technological marvel, designed for a specific impossibility: carrying the war across thousands of miles of ocean to the Japanese mainland. Morgan didn't just want to admire the plane. He had to fly it. His opportunity arose during a meeting with the architect of the air war himself, Army Air Forces Commander General Henry Hap Arnold. Arnold recognized that Morgan was now a valuable asset, a living symbol of Air Force invincibility. He made the young pilot an extraordinary offer. Morgan could have any job in the AAF he wanted, quote, short of Arnold's own command. Most men, having already defied statistical probability by surviving one tour, would have chosen a safe training post or a high-ranking desk job. Morgan didn't hesitate. He looked the general in the eye and volunteered to command a squadron of the new superfortresses in the Pacific. Before shipping out for his second war, however, Morgan attended to matters of the heart. He married his Asheville sweetheart, Dorothy Jackson, grounding himself in a life he hoped to return to. In the high-stakes superstition of bomber crews, the name of a plane was more than paint. It was a talisman. Continuing the tradition he started with the Belle, Morgan christened his assigned B-29, tail number 4224592, the Dauntless Dotty. He commissioned the famous artist George Petty to paint a pin-up girl on the nose, this time honoring his new wife. Morgan spent the autumn of 1944 at Pratt Army Airfield in Kansas, learning to tame the new beast. And a beast it was. For all its futuristic comfort, the B-29 was rushed into service, notoriously temperamental. Its massive Wright R-3350 engines were powerful, but prone to catastrophic overheating. Morgan quickly realized that while the B-29 outclassed the B-17 in performance, it, quote, couldn't hold a candle to the 17 in reliability. But the trade-off was necessary. By late 1944, Major Morgan, with Dotty painted on the nose and his veteran bombardier Vince Evans by his side, deployed to Saipan. Here, there was no English Channel to cross. There were thousands of miles of unforgiving open ocean. November 24th, 1944, Isley Field, Saipan. Before dawn, 110 shiny new B-29 superfortresses roared off the runway one by one, climbing into the tropical sky. In the lead bomber, Dauntless Dotty, Major Morgan grasped the controls with a mixture of determination and anticipation. One of the men later wrote how, quote, he could sense the weight of history resting on his shoulders. This mission would be the first American bombing attack on Tokyo since the famed Doolittle raid of 1942. Now, instead of a token strike by a few medium bombers, an entire armada of B-29s was about to unleash destruction on the heart of Imperial Japan. Sitting in Dotty's cockpit, however, Morgan ceded the left-hand pilot seat to a special guest, Brigadier General Emmett Rosie O'Donnell Jr., commander of the 73rd Bomb Wing, who flew as mission commander. Morgan shifted to the right-hand seat as co-pilot, effectively serving as O'Donnell's deputy while still piloting his beloved ship. Also aboard was Vince Evans, serving as lead bombardier, the same role he'd performed so expertly in the skies over Europe. Their target lay 1,500 miles away, the Nakajima Aircraft Engine Factory at Musashino, on the outskirts of Tokyo. As the formation approached Japan, things began to go wrong. 17 B-29s aborted with engine trouble before even reaching the assembly point. The remaining bombers climbed to their cruising altitude, near 30,000 feet, where the air was thin and unfamiliar winds buffeted them. Suddenly, the Americans learned about the jet stream, a high-altitude wind current that roared over Japan at over 100 miles per hour. That morning, it hit the B-29s with a tailwind of roughly 120 miles per hour, drastically increasing their ground speed. Morgan's bomb wing hurtled over the Japanese coastline at nearly 450 miles per hour, far faster than expected, and the Norden bomb site struggled to compensate. To make matters worse, a layer of thick cloud blanketed the target. Peering through his sight, Captain Evans could barely make out the factory below. The moment of surprise was lost, and sirens wailed over Tokyo as the enemy realized a major air raid was underway. As the B-29s reached Mount Fuji and turned toward the target, they were met with furious opposition. Every fighter the Japanese 10th Air Division could scramble rushed to intercept the superfortresses. Morgan's Dauntless Dotty, flying at the head of the formation, became the focal point for enemy attacks. At 30,000 feet over Tokyo, Dotty came under attack from multiple directions. A nimble Nakajima Ki-84 Frank fighter dove out of the sun, screaming down in a vertical attack that gave Morgan's gunnery only a split second to respond. Tracers streaked past the cockpit as the Ki-84 scissored away. Almost immediately, two Kawasaki Ki-61 Tony fighters pounced head-on, closing in at over 600 miles per hour relative speed. The bomber's forward turret stuttered to life, its twin 50 caliber machine guns chattering, but the enemy planes flashed by in an instant. Morgan's top gunner reported more bogies diving at them from above. It was a chaotic melee in the thin air over Tokyo. Flak shells burst around the formation, but the heavy flak guns on the ground proved surprisingly ineffective at such an altitude. The Japanese fighters, though tenacious, attacked in piecemeal waves rather than in a coordinated swarm. Many enemy pilots simply couldn't climb high enough to catch the fast B-29s. Despite the onslaught, Morgan and his fellow airmen pressed on to the target area. Amid intermittent breaks in the clouds, 24 B-29s managed to line up on Musashino and drop their bombs. Morgan's lead bombardier toggled the release in Dauntless Dotty. Hundreds of bombs tumbled earthward. But the high winds played havoc with their trajectories. Crosswinds scattered the bomb pattern widely across the outskirts of Tokyo. Of the 240 bombs dropped on the Musashino factory, only about 48 struck near the target, and at least 3 of those were duds that failed to explode. The remainder missed entirely, blowing craters in fields or residential districts. The few hits did minimal damage to the hardened plant. Post-war analysis found only 2.4% of the factory's machinery was damaged, and just 1% of its buildings. In short, the much-anticipated first strike had barely scratched the target. Meanwhile, Japanese fighters continued their harassing attacks. One desperate pilot turned his damaged Ki-44 fighter into a projectile, ramming a B-29 mid-air, shearing off the bomber's tail. That superfortress spiraled into the Pacific, 20 miles off the coast, taking down all 11 crewmen with it. It was the only B-29 lost to enemy action that day, remarkable given the scale of the raid. All other airframe losses that day came from bombers forced to ditch on the way back due to fuel exhaustion or engine failure. Morgan wheeled Dauntless Dotty back toward Saipan after the drop, fuel gauges already dropping toward empty after the 14-hour round trip. Though the physical destruction in Tokyo was slight, the psychological impact was enormous. America had proven it could strike the Japanese capital in force. The raid also provided hard lessons. Morgan later recalled that over Tokyo, quote, "We had a hell of a time with our bomb sight, and I had the best bombardier with me. The high-altitude approach and unexpected jet stream made precision bombing nearly impossible." In the end, the debut B-29 raid on Tokyo was deemed a tactical failure, but an illuminating one. It, quote, "set the pattern for the next 3 months of the air campaign." U.S. high-altitude bombing proved inaccurate, while Japanese defenses proved ineffective at stopping the superfortresses. Neither side could yet deal a knockout blow. For now, the B-29s would keep coming, and Tokyo could only watch warily as the sky filled with silver specks day after day. Following the inaugural Tokyo strike, Major Morgan and Dauntless Dotty flew mission after mission as the air war against Japan escalated. Throughout late 1944 and into early 1945, the 497th Bomb Group hit a variety of strategic targets: aircraft factories, harbors, rail yards, and military installations on the Japanese home islands. They bombed Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and other cities, often returning to Tokyo's industrial suburbs in repeated efforts to destroy Musashino and other high-value plants. Frustration mounted as many of those high-altitude raids yielded only modest results. The jet stream winds and frequent cloud cover continued to thwart accuracy. Japanese fighters still harried the formations, but as Morgan observed, the B-29s could generally fend for themselves. Loss rates remained low. The real enemies were engine fires, mechanical breakdowns, and the unforgiving vastness of the Pacific Ocean. One analyst concluded, quote, "Mechanical problems and fuel management proved a bigger risk to B-29 survival than Japanese fighters or anti-aircraft." Morgan's own experience confirmed this. In one instance, Dauntless Dotty herself narrowly avoided catastrophe, not from enemy guns, but from mechanical ill fate. On a bombing run over Tokyo in early 1945, 2 of Dotty's 4 engines suddenly lost power, likely victims of overheating and oil failure, a common B-29 malady. With the superfortress struggling to maintain altitude, Morgan's crew jettisoned whatever they could to lighten the aircraft. Even so, they could not make it back to Saipan on 2 engines. Fortunately, by this point, the Americans had captured Iwo Jima, an island roughly midway between Japan and the Marianas. Morgan turned his limping bomber toward it, and hours later, after a tense approach, he managed to nurse the ailing B-29 onto the runway, instead of ditching at sea. Many other B-29 crews would echo that sentiment. Iwo Jima became a haven for hundreds of emergency landings. As the campaign wore on, the strategy evolved. In January 1945, Major General Curtis LeMay took command of 21st Bomber Command and began implementing drastic changes. It was clear that high-altitude precision bombing wasn't crippling Japan's industry fast enough. LeMay decided to turn the B-29 into a night terror weapon. Crews were ordered to strip most of the defensive guns from their bombers to save weight for more bombs, and to attack Japanese cities at low altitude under cover of darkness, using incendiary bombs to ignite the largely wood and paper cities. These new tactics would expose Morgan and his fellow airmen to new dangers. Flying at just 5,000 to 8,000 feet meant they'd be well within range of light flak and would have no fighter escort at night. But the potential payoff was enormous. A single fleet of B-29s could burn down a city and devastate Japan's war-making capacity. Morgan, now a seasoned veteran of 2 wars, surely understood the grim implications. Still, orders were orders. On the evening of March 9, 1945, ground crews at Isley Field packed Dauntless Dotty's bomb bays with clusters of incendiary bombs. The target, Tokyo itself. This mission, codenamed Operation Meeting House, would be a massive firebombing aimed at the capital's densely populated districts. Just before midnight, Morgan's B-29 joined a stream of some 279 superfortresses climbing into the moonlit sky, their silver skins gleaming as they formed up and set course for Japan. Unlike the daylight raids, this time there was no pretending at precision. Each bomber carried up to 7 tons of incendiary napalm-filled bomblets and gelatinized gasoline, meant to spark thousands of fires below. Morgan and his men had removed most of their guns and ammunition to lighten the load. Their best defense would be the cover of darkness. A few hours later, in the early hours of March 10th, Dauntless Dotty arrived over Tokyo in the middle of a hellish spectacle. Flying at only 7,000 feet, Morgan could see the city stretching out below, its streets forming a grid of orange glow as waves of B-29s ahead of him unloaded incendiaries. The first B-29s to strike had dropped their bombs shortly after midnight, deliberately aiming on upwind edges of the target zone to let the firestorm's winds drive the conflagration across the city. Now, the heart of Tokyo was an ocean of fire. Morgan and Evans lined up Dauntless Dotty on their assigned path and released their payload into the maelstrom. Thousands of small firebombs tumbled out, each one igniting into sticky flames upon impact, joining the blazing tapestry below. The heat from the inferno reached their aircraft, even at altitude, and turbulence rocked the B-29 as columns of hot air rose from the burning city. Crewmen could smell the smoke even inside their pressurized compartments. In the ghostly reddish glare reflecting off the clouds, Tokyo was being consumed. The results were beyond anything Morgan had witnessed in Europe. 16 square miles of Tokyo, an area nearly the size of Manhattan, were completely burned out by the next morning. The destruction surpassed even the worst Dresden bombing just a month prior. Japanese fire brigades were utterly overwhelmed by the hurricane of flame. Most estimates say around 100,000 people perished in Tokyo that night, an unprecedented toll for a single air raid. At least 1 million residents were left homeless, wandering among the smoking ruins the next day. It was, as historians have noted, the single deadliest air raid of World War II, with a greater immediate loss of life than even the atomic bombing of Hiroshima later that year. Major Morgan's Dauntless Dotty had played its part in this terrible destruction, delivering incendiaries into the cauldron. As they turned back for Saipan, the crew fell into awed silence, seeing the glow of Tokyo's fires still visible from 150 miles away. The city was scorched black. In those somber moments, the men aboard Dotty surely grasped that they had unleashed a new level of devastation, the kind that could finally break the enemy's will. By April 1945, after 5 grueling months of combat, Major Robert Morgan had flown wartime sorties. In truth, some records credit him with 26 missions in the Pacific, but in either case, Morgan had yet again tempted fate and survived a full tour. He was one of the very few Army Air Forces pilots to complete tours in both major theaters of war. By this time, his fame had spread. The press back home loved the story of the Memphis Belle skipper, who went on to fight Japan. Brigadier General O'Donnell, his wing commander, eventually took Morgan aside in mid-April and gently suggested, quote, "Don't you think it's time to retire from combat? You've been extraordinarily lucky to complete 50 missions, and I think it's time for you to go home." Morgan didn't protest. He had given his all, and with a wife waiting back home, he finally agreed it was time to leave the rest of the war to younger crews. On April 24th, 1945, alongside his faithful bombardier, Vince Evans, Major Morgan flew out of Saipan for the United States. He was home in Asheville, North Carolina by early May, just as victory was being secured in Europe, and after VJ Day, the Pacific Campaign entered its final summer. Morgan formally left active duty in September 1945, though he remained in the Air Force Reserve, rising to colonel by the 1960s. He had survived 2 theaters of brutal aerial combat and earned a place among America's most distinguished aviators. He often downplayed his own heroism, quote, "We were not heroes. We simply did our jobs and were in the right place at the right time." Major Morgan's war was over, but Dauntless Dotty flew on without him for a few final weeks. The trusty B-29 continued to serve with the 497th Bomb Group through May 1945 under other pilots, participating in the last bombing raids over Japan. In total, Dotty was credited with 53 combat missions, logging over 880 hours of combat flight time and covering 176,000 miles. As the war neared its end, the veteran aircraft was selected to return to the U.S., possibly for a stateside war bond tour or overhaul. On June 6, 1945, with Japan's defeat looming, Dauntless Dotty began her long journey home. The plan was to ferry the B-29 back across the Pacific via island hopping. That day, an experienced crew under Captain William A. Kelly took off from Kwajalein Atoll in the Marshall Islands, heading for Hawaii. It was 3:06 a.m. local time when Dottie's 4 engines roared to life and she trundled down the runway. A few of the men aboard were likely passengers hitching a ride home, eager to see loved ones after long months of war. But just seconds after becoming airborne, something went horribly wrong. Witnesses saw Dauntless Dotty's climb falter almost immediately after takeoff. Barely 40 seconds into the flight, the bomber seemed to lose lift. Perhaps an engine failed, or cargo shifted, and the huge aircraft could not sustain altitude. In the ink-black night, Dotty crashed nose first into the Pacific Ocean, just beyond the atoll, hitting the water with a tremendous impact. The B-29 sank almost instantly beneath the surface, its long journey ending in tragedy. Rescue boats sped out, but initially found only wreckage bobbing on the swells. Of the 13 souls on board, 10 were lost instantly, likely trapped inside as the bomber went down. In the darkness and confusion, 3 men had been flung clear of the wreck and miraculously survived. Co-pilot John Neville, tail gunner Glenn F. Gregory, and left gunner Charles McMurray found themselves in the water, clinging to debris and each other. For 45 agonizing minutes, they waited until the U.S. Navy crash boat reached them and pulled them from the sea. They were the only survivors of Dauntless Dotty's final, ill-fated flight. The superfortress's wreck, containing the remains of the other 10 crewmen, disappeared beneath 6,000 feet of water off Kwajalein. To this day, neither the aircraft nor the lost men have been recovered, a somber tomb somewhere on the ocean floor. After all its battles and close calls, the mighty Dauntless Dotty met its end not at enemy hands, but in a tragic accident just weeks before the Pacific War's end.